I love it, dude. This stream deck is gonna, I think, really make our time together entertaining for ourselves and for others, which is great. So we were talking off camera about like, hey man, what could we focus on today? And it just seems to be this reoccurring theme that market dynamics are shifting and changing. Inventory's rising. In fact, perhaps before we get into that conversation, I know you are always doing like these in-depth studies of stats, and you notice something showing up in the stats as far as inventory and price points. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm seeing it not just where you're at, in California, but I'm also seeing it with other kind of agents in our organization and individuals that I'm working with one-on-one.
So we do a monthly report that we send to our clients every single month with just like market stats, and it goes previous month to current month, and it goes previous year same month to current year same month, basically. And what I noticed is that year over year, supply in our county had increased by around 60%. I think it was like it went from like 1,100 homes to 1,800 homes. Now, that's not a problem, obviously, if demand increases by the same percentage. But when we looked at demand may be increased by like 5%, which means that there's 60% more homes and demand is pretty similar to what it was. So obviously when that happens, it basically causes a little bit of the market dynamics to change, basically. So it's something that we're monitoring all the time. So what we wanted to talk today was, okay, one of the skills that as a real estate agent you need is being able to present price at the listing presentation. And I actually role played this with one of our agents, Sam, today. And he's like, look, like, they're asking me how the market is. Do I just basically make it all do? And it's funny because I competed against another agent, and the other agent, his thing was he brought in all this research why the market's going to drop 10% over the next year. And the seller's like, dude, like it was just overwhelming for them. And they ended up choosing not to go with them because he had all this like research as to what is happening. So, you can communicate this to the seller that, hey, look, there's some changes in the marketplace, but to do it in a way where it doesn't make it like all doom and gloom type of situation. Cause obviously you are interviewing, you do want to get hired, and they don't want that doom and gloom type of agent that brings all the reasons why everything is doom and gloom.
Yeah. I would propose that agent was attempting to deal with that gap in the marketplace that we've been talking about, right? Which is that clearly as we see inventory go up, and we're seeing it not just in your market, I'm seeing it all across the country, that inventory is going up, properties that are selling need price adjustments, offers coming in less than the asking price. So there's a gap though in the market between where there's actually comps to kind of support what you're saying to them is happening in the marketplace. So as such, prior to having that data, we have to kind of really do a good job of framing the conversation and kind of presenting in a way that shows a direction, right? I remember sitting with Leo, actually, Jose, when I interviewed him. I went down to Miami and we shot some content. Leo Perea, the CEO of EXP. And he was like, yeah, like I always try to make directional bets. Right. So it's like, it's very difficult to know like, an exact sort of thing. But if I can get a clear picture as to the direction, I can usually make better decisions. So that agent had the right kind of thought, because they weren't saying something that wasn't accurate. They can't definitively say for sure it's going to, go down 10%. At the same time, they seem to be doing it in a way I would propose with a high degree of probability based on the seller's reaction of like, I'm right, you're wrong. Here's why I'm right. And if you don't think that I'm right, then you're silly. Versus allowing them to self-discover directionally based on data and asking questions where the marketplace seems to be headed, right? And you can say things like, hey, you know, Jose, I don't have a crystal ball. And anybody who, you know, says that they do or presents in a manner as though they do is probably not being honest, right? And what I find is, you know, if we look at the data, both kind of from a 30,000 foot view, like macro, and then we look at kind of micro, what's happening locally here in our marketplace, the data will provide us with a direction, right? So what I'd like to do prior to having this conversation is I'd like to go over with you some of that data. And the goal and objective is for that information to provide context for this conversation about price, right? Because I'm on your team. I want to help you to get as much money possible. That's for sure. We get compensated more the more we help you sell it for. At the same time, I know this move is very important to you and you guys don't want to have it sit on the market month after month and not sell. So let's review this information. Then we'll go over the market analysis. After that, we'll go over the different strategies that you have at your disposal. This is a strategy and attempt to get the most.
I think Aaron froze. So what do you do when somebody freezes? So I'll wait for him to come back on. I think what he's going to be going over is just the different ways of presenting the market analysis. I can go over a different way of presenting. At the same time, I want to let Aaron kind of finish his thought before I kind of go into that different way of presenting, and I wanted to get his opinion on it as well too. So I think that he'll hop on any moment now. So in the meantime, we've got some music going on for you guys. Let's see if I can see some of the comments in the meantime. Comments. Yo, hey fellas, time to grow. We back. Laugh out loud. 10:45. That's funny. What's up, guys? Maybe I should just take it in the completely different direction. I'll wait about 30 more seconds, and if not, I'll take it in a different direction, basically. Dum, dum, dum. It'd be fun.
You were playing the waiting music? That's good, bro. I don't know why, dude. We have...
That's funny.
Anyway, so yeah, like, do you see how I set that up, right? Structurally, where I think that agent had the right idea. And it's not that the information that they were sharing isn't accurate, because I do agree with them that market conditions are changing, and that with a high degree of probability as time progresses, through no fault of, you know, their own or the homeowner's own, that, you know, there will be downward pressure in terms of pricing depending on product and, you know, whatever. It's just how they're going about it. The strategy that they were deploying on how to present it, how to set that frame was off.
Yeah. So this is the way I went over it with Sam this morning, and I basically presented it in a very similar fashion. At the same time, when I was going over the comps, I basically painted a picture. So what I think when it comes time to presenting the price, a lot of it starts with just your ability to pre-qualify correctly and know what the seller's expectations are. So if you know what the seller's expectations are as it relates to price, you're going to have a pretty good idea as to how to present it. If you don't know what their expectations are, you're going to find yourself thinking that it's a certain thing and then being completely off. So I'll give you guys an example. Let's say that the seller is wanting 740,000 and you know that the market now is at 700,000. So you can present your comps in a way where it's like, look, at some point the marketplace was at 740. This is where the marketplace is now, basically. Let's say that the seller wants 800 and the market's at 700. Then your selection of your comps is going to be a little bit different I had a seller that wanted 2 million recently, and their house was only worth like 1.5. So what I did is I brought properties that were at 2 million. I'm like, look, there are properties that are selling at 2 million. This is what those properties look like. It was like a 6,000 square foot home versus a 3,000 square foot home. You know, it was a home with a pool versus a home without a pool, a home on an acre versus on a quarter of an acre. So even like, so give me some feedback on this.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I did is, so Aaron, what I've done in preparation for our meeting is I prepared what I call a comparative market analysis, basically for you. Now, when taking a look at this market analysis, I want to be clear that none of the properties are going to be exactly the same. What I mean by that is that every property is going to be different, varying on condition, location, square footage, and lot size. So, in other words, a market analysis is not going to give us a pinpoint to the dollar amount, but instead it's going to give us a range. Now, once it gives us a range, it'll come down to strategy. And there's two different strategies that you can implement. One, you start off a little bit higher to maybe leave a little bit of room to negotiate. Or two, you start off a little bit lower, and sometimes that drives the price up. Or in some cases, it could lead in a situation where you have more than one buyer competing for the property. Now, I want to be clear as it relates to the price. You're the boss. You get to make all the final decisions. Obviously, we can make some recommendations. At the same time, you get to make that final decision. Is that okay with you, basically?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm like, okay, before I get into the comps, let's review the tax record. Let's review some details about your property. The tax records show your property as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square feet, and built in 1956 on an 8,000 square foot lot. Does that look correct? And they're like, yeah, that looks correct. Okay, great. So let's start off by taking a look at the first property. So the first property is this property on 123 Banana Street. Are you familiar with this home at all?
No.
Okay. So this is the one that was 2 streets down. If you look at it, it's actually a model match. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. It's 1,500 square feet. Now, you know when you mentioned to me that you wanted a price of about 740 to 750, this one actually sold at that $740,000 number that we talked about. Now, the only thing that I want you to pay attention to is the date when it sold. So, this property actually sold in September of 2024. Now, the reason this is important is because there has been some changes in the marketplace, and there has been some changes as it relates to pricing, and the next comp is going to show you that. So I'll get into the next comp in a bit, but I just wanted to point that out, that at some point properties were selling around the $740,000 mark. This is what that property looked like from the interior of the home. Okay. So let me show you the next property. So this is actually a model match as well too. This is over on 123 Simon Street. Are you familiar with this one?
I know the street.
Okay, perfect. So 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet as well too. Now here's the important thing that I want you to pay attention to. You see the original price?
Yep.
$750, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's take a look at the history. So they started off at $750, very likely because the other one sold at $740. Then if you can see, they dropped it to $725, no offers, and then they dropped it to $700. And when they dropped it to $700, that's actually when they went into escrow.
Low.
Okay. So let's take a look at the condition of the property right here. Kitchen, bathrooms, blah, blah, blah. Aaron, just out of curiosity, how would you rate this property in comparison to yours? Would you say that this one is better than yours? Would you say that this one is better than yours? Or would you say that they're similar, meaning they have some things that you don't have and you have some things that they don't have?
Yeah, probably that last one.
Okay, similar. Okay. Now, this is where a tie down question would probably be good. Like something along the lines or this is where I may need some feedback. being that the other one, so what do you think that the marketplace, Aaron, is telling us about, or what do you think that the marketplace is telling us, knowing that this property started off at 740, then dropped it to 725, and then came down to 700, knowing that that other one basically had already sold at 740?
Well, I
Or
mean,
what are your thoughts on that? Like,
yeah,
how
yeah, yeah.
can I,
So I think this is,
how can I
I think,
polish that up?
yeah, here's how you polish it up. The setup is great. Everything you walk through is great. There's like tiny little nuanced things. So when you shared with me, like, yeah, like that one sold in September of 2024. Do you see that? And you're like, yeah. You know, what's interesting about that to me, Jose, is that price is a snapshot in time. That little phrase, right? So price is a snapshot in time. So what that lets us know is at that time, which would be, and then you could pull one of your Jose's like September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. 10 months ago, homes were selling for $750,000. Now, I don't need to tell you that the marketplace is fluid. It's not static, meaning that it's constantly changing, right? And I believe when we look at the next piece of data or information, we'll see how it has been changing. So here's the next
Fantastic.
one. Yeah. So here's the next one that we'll take a look. And that's just framing, right? And that little phrase like snapshot in time. And then here's the next one we'll take a look at. And the way you ran through that was great. What I didn't hear you do though is when did it close?
So it's an escrow.
Okay, good. So that means let's do the math on this, Jose. If it's an escrow, that means they got an offer and they've gotten an offer within the last like maybe 30 or 60 days because it usually takes 30 to 60 days to close. Does that make sense to you?
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember how, I just mentioned that price is a snapshot in time?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting to see because when we looked at the condition, we agreed, and I agree with you that it's in similar condition to this home. And how would you say that it compares to the one that sold back in September?
It's similar as well,
Yeah,
too.
I agree. So then the only difference is time and the marketplace shifting and changing. So we have one home selling 10 months ago for 750 and one currently selling in very similar condition for 700. Now, here's my question to you, Jose. What do you think the marketplace is showing us has been taking place over the last 10 months with regards to how much we can get for homes that are similar to yours?
Got it. Now, let me ask you this. At this point, I also had now at this point, would you head in that direction or would you go over the third comp? Because I
So I
added
would
two of
probably
those
go
too.
over the third, but so I was just
And then,
following your track, but I would be like, yeah, like, and when did that one sell? And they're like, like, well, it's an escrow. Yeah. And what that means then is, let me think about this. Yeah, like homes usually takes like 45, 60 days to close. That means that it went under contract, let's say a month or two ago. So in other words, we have one snapshot in time from 10 months ago at 750, and we have another one here at 700. So let's take a look at the next one.
okay.
And then
then,
you go and you do the same thing. Then you would ask, what do you think the marketplace is showing us?
yeah. So the next one is actually an active one,
Oh, good.
basically that I basically went over in the
Because
example I had
you like to
earlier.
go in the opposite direction. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
like, well, whenever my kind of thought is, and this is what we were talking about earlier in the week, is
Yeah.
if I know that they want a higher price, I'll paint the picture in that manner. It's very easy for me to make that transition, be like, look, at some point at that time, this is what the marketplace was telling us. Or because a lot of times, like, let's say that there has been a shift and you know that they want a higher price. It's like, I'm just putting it on the table, be like, look, at some
Well,
point, prices were selling at
yeah.
750,
And what I like about it is you're not making them wrong
Yeah.
and you're aligning. Yeah. Hey, I just want to be clear. It is accurate that 10 months ago, some like homes were selling for 750,000.
Bro,
So it totally makes
bro,
sense to me.
tell me it's not a beautiful structure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I do like it. And it does. Hey, that was too much. So, yeah, I like it because it aligns yourself and you're not making them wrong. And then, yeah, I would go over the next one and do the same thing as you
So the
did.
next one is
Make sure
actually
that
a property. So the last one that I wanted to go over with you is actually another property. So this one's active on the marketplace right now. Now,
Mhm.
the thing to pay attention to is that it's actually the model matches well too. So it's also the 1,500 square foot model, and they are currently listed at 740,000. Now, take a look at how many days it's been on the market.
Wow.
110 days.
That's a long time.
Now, the interesting thing about this is that this neighbor has actually done us a huge favor. Do you know what that is?
What's that?
Well, he's actually testing out the marketplace for us at a different price, and it's actually not working. Not only that, but I did speak with the agent, and what the agent mentioned to me is that they're very close to making an adjustment on the price.
Mm,
So let me give you a quick summary of what we just went over, okay?
sure.
So we have the first one that sold at 740. As we mentioned, or as we talked about it, that one sold in September. And obviously, we came to the conclusion that that was a different time in the marketplace, basically. We
Yeah.
have the most recent property that started off on 123 Banana Street, which we both said that that one was pretty similar to yours. That one started off at 740, dropped it to 725, and is now in escrow at 700. And then we have the one that's active on the marketplace at 740, but it's been sitting there for 110 days. So here's my question to you. Based on what we see, where is the marketplace showing us that we would need to be at price-wise right now, not 8 months ago, that would be somewhat reflective of fair market value? All right, tweaks.
Yeah. So it's solid. What I just wrote down, how I would say that at the end is like, so remember how I shared with you how the buyer's hat's different than the seller's hat?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we put on our buyer's hat for a moment, and let's imagine for a moment that you wanted to purchase this home all over again that we're sitting in,
Okay.
and you asked me to do the same analysis that we've just run over because you want to make sure that you're getting a good value.
Mhm.
So we go over this data that I just showed you in terms of one 10 months ago selling for 750, one sold, or one that's in escrow at 700, one on the market at 710 for 110 days and not selling. My question to you is, as a buyer, not a seller, if you were going to buy this home all over again, having reviewed that data, Jose, where do you think you'd feel comfortable making an offer that you believe would be reflective of fair market value?
And then shut up.
And then shut up.
Now, here's what I do want to point out. In that example, when I went over like, okay, like the 740 at some point and then worked my way down, and even with the active, like I presented the active at the end, basically, I feel like that paints like a really nice picture. Like, and this is the problem that I see when most people present price at the listing presentation. And this was the example during our role play this week, that I didn't have a picture, like meaning that there's no direction as to like notice how I feel like I'm guiding you
Yeah.
without telling you, hey, look, this is where you need to be. But I'm basically painting a picture for you saying, hey, look, at some point prices were here. This is what's going on now. This neighbor's sitting on the market at this price. Where do you believe that we should be? And it's almost like, okay, like the picture is pretty obvious. Now, whether you want to see it or not, that's going to be up to you.
Yeah,
Like
and
at
and
some
here's
point,
what'll get in the way. So what's interesting is I'm working on the book, and I appreciate you giving me some feedback and stuff. And I've been going through daily, adding stories and anecdotes and things. And what I was actually on today, which is funny that we're having this conversation today, was the different biases, psychological quirks
in
that we have in our thinking as humans. And I'm aware that at the beginning of my career, I used to get really frustrated with people, right? Because they didn't see what I was seeing, because I really didn't understand what was happening. So after reading a couple books on the topic, it helped me to have, instead of getting frustrated, but to like have like compassion, because I do the same things. Like we all do the same things. And then once I understand what they are, I can come up with strategies to combat these kind of biases that cause people not to see things clearly. So I think it might be helpful, Jose, just to very quickly go over what those biases are. So one is the endowment effect. So with the endowment effect, because it's mine, I think it's worth more. So like the great comedian George Carlin, he said, like, you ever notice that my stuff is stuff and your stuff is crap? And that's the endowment effect, right? And they've done quantifiable, measurable studies in universities where if me and you, if we touch a cup, we hold it in our hand for like a minute, we will pay more for that cup than we will something that we haven't touched. The reason is because we start to we feel like it's ours, it's mine, right? And what could possibly have more of that than the home that we live in? So that's one psychological bias that people have. Mine is better, right? And you'll notice, like, me and you have never met with a seller that doesn't think that their home's the best home in the neighborhood. Like, it's almost invariably true that they believe that, right?
Yeah.
The next psychological quirk is something called resulting. So, like, let's say you sold a home 10 years ago and you used X, Y, and Z strategy. You think, oh, it worked then, that means it's always going to work. You know, when I sold my home 5 years ago, I priced it where I wanted to price it at, and I got higher than that. So, like, that means it's always going to do that. No, that's not accurate, because you don't have any context, right? Marketplace was entirely different 5 years ago, particularly in 2021, right? And even in 2020, it was wild. So it's a completely different environment, but people do that. My sister's cousin's uncle said that, you know, I should do this, this, and this, and I'll be able to get the price that I want because they did it once in 1975, right? And then the last one is called motivated reasoning, which is where if I really want something to be true or need it to be true, right, what'll happen is I'll seek out evidence to support my belief, and I'll ignore evidence to the contrary. So that'll be people who say things to you like, when you sit down with them, Jose, I don't care what the comps say. You know, you have somebody that's detached from reality the moment that they say that, right? Or they'll say things like, well, you're a great salesperson, Jose. I believe in you that you can get the price, right? And I always like to be like, listen, I appreciate your vote of confidence, and I'm a great salesperson. You're right. At the same time, unfortunately, I don't get to dictate what something's worth. The marketplace does, right? And then bring them back to like the data and the information. Or they'll seek out one comp that from like, you know, I don't know, like 10 miles away or like 20, 30 miles away from where their home sold, and be like, look, that one looks like mine and sold for that. You know what I mean?
Or they'll say things like, oh my God, look, like the fires, you know, the people from the Palisades, you know, like their house is burned down. Like these insurance are paying like all this money. Yeah, they're going to want to buy your $500,000 home when they had a $10 million home in the Pacific Palisades, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they'll
Yeah.
say things like that.
Yeah, and that's motivated reasoning. So what we're doing here, the whole reason I'm going down this path, Jose, is I want people to understand like what we're doing and how we're structuring the conversation. It's combating those biases, right? So let's say the endowment effect. When we go through and you're like, yeah, like the way that you just presented those comps, they think that it's better. By you asking them, hey, I'm curious, like, how would you say that this home compares to yours in terms of features and amenities? Would you say it's more like nicer than yours? Is it as nice, or maybe like kind of
Similar.
you know
Well,
similar?
I'll tell you the key word is the similar.
Yeah.
Maybe they have some things that you don't have, and you have some things that
Yes,
they don't have.
because
And I'll
people
tell
are
you why.
willing to admit that.
Yes, but the reason is that if you don't say it that way, they will say, "Well, I have
Right.
a pool," but then yet they have a view, you know? Or like I had the kitchen, but then they have their upgraded all their bathrooms and you don't have your upgraded bathrooms. And if not, you get stuck in like this little battle, not this little battle, these little like, "Oh, well, my home has this or this home has that." It's easier just to be like, "Hey, would you say that they're similar?" Meaning they have some things that you don't have and you have some things that they don't have. And a lot of times I'll be like, that makes sense. Yes, they're similar, which what you're doing is if they say it's similar, then if it's similar, it's very likely in the same price range,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's what we're doing. Or like when they say like, the motivated reasoning, we're showing them the information. And then what you'll notice that we do, because remember when we did that rapid fire of objections around price, but I kept bringing you back, bringing you back, bringing you back. I would acknowledge what you said, set the frame, give you the message, bring you back. Acknowledge what you said, set the frame, give you the message, bring you back to the data. That's me combating motivated reasoning. You're trying to like look away and find something else, right? And I'm just bringing you back politely to, hey, this is the information that you need to make a decision on. And when you do this properly, the other thing that I wrote down that's critical about what we're talking about right here and how we're teaching people how to present is it forces the homeowner to self-discover. Whether you ask like, hey, where do you think we need to be at price-wise in order to create value in the eyes of the buyer, make them choose our home versus competition? Or hey, if you were a buyer and you were going to buy this home all over again, right? Having seen what's active on the market, not selling, seeing what's sold, closed most recently, where do you think you'd feel comfortable making an offer that you believe would be reflective of fair market value? And then be quiet. And then they're either going to say something reasonable, unreasonable, or they're going to hem and haw. So reasonable is they're like, yeah, probably around like, truthfully, if that one's sold for 700 at 710, they're going to get a price reduction. Probably like in the high sixes. You'd be like, yeah, I agree with you. The marketplace is showing us, not Jose. And that's how that other agent did it wrong. I promise you that the one you were competing with, it was them dictating kind of like, this is what I think, right?
Well, a lot of times too, you can paint a picture just by selecting the right comps and selecting the right order as to how you present the comps. I think that you can help paint a picture for that without having to necessarily break out with like all these different statistics or all these different things that are doom and gloom. Now, here's what I do want to point out. What I do want to point out is that this same strategy that I just went over also works when somebody tells you, hey, look, I want $2 million for my home, and you know that their home is only worth $1 million. I'll put like the $2 million homes, and instead of saying, hey, look, that's what the market was at that time, I would say something. What I'm noticing is that there are properties that are selling at the $2 million range. Here's what I'm noticing about those properties. The properties that are selling at the $2 million range are either 6,000 square foot plus properties or properties that have over an acre in size. Now, when we take a look at the other one, we're going to see what properties that are selling about 3,000 square foot and are on a quarter acre, what those are selling for. So I'm basically able to like be like, yes, there are properties that are selling at $2 million. Here's what those look like. Now, here's what the properties that were
and then
most similar like selling for,
exactly.
basically.
And what popped into my head is a key phrase. So like, let's say, like how you're presenting it, which I really like. Yeah, there are homes that are selling for 2 million, and my intention in showing them to you so we can see on average what those homes have to offer. And I've noticed a pattern emerge.
You know what I noticed? I just got Aaron's approval. He said, "I really."
Hey, doesn't that feel good?
He said, "I really."
You know what's funny, Jose?
I really like the way that you're presenting.
It's so funny, dude, because sometimes when I would role play with Neil, and even now, like if Neil says like, "Hey, that was good," I feel like a little kid. I'm like, yes. I feel so proud of myself. So anyway, it was good.
Lost the train of thought. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. So, yeah. So as you're presenting and saying like, yeah, we're going to look at two pieces of data. The first piece of data is what we're going to look at are homes that are selling for 2 million, because there are homes selling for 2 million. And as we look at those homes, I believe what we'll see is a pattern emerge in terms of like features and amenities and what those homes have to offer. Then what we'll do is we'll look at homes that have very similar features and amenities to yours in terms of size, square footage, lot size, things of that nature. So that way we can make, here's the key phrase, an apples to apples comparison. Everybody knows that apples to apples. You want to compare apples to apples, right? So that way we can make an apples to apples comparison. And in doing so, what we'll see emerge, Jose, is not like a pinpoint to the penny, but instead what we're going to see is a very tight range as to what you and your family can expect based on what buyers and sellers have been agreeing to for homes similar to yours. Does that approach make sense to you? Now, with that big of a disparity, I want everybody watching to know, like, unless like their motivation's a 10, I'm going to do that over the phone because the probability that they're going to do it is small, right? But this is how, when there's a difference, if there's $100,000 difference, like he was using that for just, scale.
It was really a 2 million. This
was
is
it really?
It was a real life. And it was funny because when I was going over them, she was like fighting it. And then what she ended up doing, bro, is she ended up getting a second opinion. And the second opinion basically ended up telling her the same information that I was basically giving her. And then at that point, it was like kind of like, oh, I need it. But I think that they were more harsh with it, basically, than what
100%, which has to do with delivery. It's like bedside manner. And then I'm curious, though, what was her motivation? It was probably super high for you to even
she's basically like buying at a state. She doesn't need the secondary property, but she kept disguising it like, oh, maybe I'll just keep it as a rental. Maybe I'll just do this. Maybe I'll just do that. And the reality was that I was able to paint a picture, be like, look, there are properties that are selling in the $2 million range. This is what they look like. And that was the first property because I knew that's what she was thinking because I qualified her, meaning I basically pre-qualified her and she told me what she was looking for in terms of price. Imagine had I not qualified her and I'm over here just presenting properties in the 1.5 range. And then I don't have the right data to bring to the presentation because I have no idea she's thinking 2 million. I'm only showing her properties in the 1.5 million range. It's going to make now a debate because I don't have the data that I
Correct.
need to be able to present it in a manner where it helps her to self discover. Now,
Yeah. So I think the key takeaway there is like how you deliver the information matters.
yeah, and you a lot of people don't realize how important it is on the pre-qualification to ask them how much they want for the home. And the key is when they say we want to hear what you have to say, you gotta push back
Push
on that.
back. Yeah.
Meaning you can't just be like, okay, because that's gonna make the presentation so much harder for you in terms of how to structure your comps in a way where you're able to paint a picture.
Yeah, and I think the response to that is simple. Like, hey, just so you know, my intention in asking is not to be nosy. It's certainly not going to influence what the marketplace shows us. We could get for your home because what something's worth is what somebody's willing to pay for it. It's really just to gauge your expectations. What I find, Jose, is that sometimes I'm not suggesting this is true for you. When I meet with homeowners, their expectations of what they would like is not in alignment with where the market's at currently, and that causes them to decide to do something different with the home. So it's really just for me to gauge expectation. I'm looking here online, and one of these online sites, they're giving an estimate of about like 1.2. Is that in alignment with you were thinking? And then
Well, what I'll kind of share with you where what I do and then the second layer because I sometimes I'll have 2 or 3 layers. It's very similar to that. The only difference at the end is I'll say, "Hey, I'm not looking for a pinpoint to exact dollar amount.
yeah,
Could
just like a range.
could you at least give me a range?" And the reason I wanna do that before I throw out like a Zillow number is I just wanna hear what they're because what if they say, "Well, I'm thinking like 500,000." And then at that point, like at 500,000 is a cash offer deal,
Mhm.
like instead of me saying, "Hey, look, Zillow's saying that." And then if they push back, then at that point, I'll be like, "Well, look," like if they say, "Well, I still want to hear what you have to say," I'll be like, "Well, look, I'm checking here online and I just kind of checked the Zillow profile. Zillow says that the property on the low side is 700,000. On the or Zillow says that, hey, look, it's 800,000. Is that kind of what you were thinking? Basically
Yeah,
the
is that
same thing,
same
but I
thing?
do that in the second layer just to be able to get a number from them first in case there's some other sort of opportunity that I don't
Yeah.
want to that
Makes sense. Yeah,
that
which
yeah.
makes sense because I know you do so much with like the cash offer program, so that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
here's what I wanna say, and this was key when we went over this. So, at the end of the presentation or whenever I say, "Hey, look, where's the marketplace showing us that we would need to be at that would be somewhat reflective of fair market value," or however it is that we say it, sometimes they'll ask you and they'll say, "Well, we wanna hear what you have to say."
Mhm.
And that is a trap.
Oh, yeah, it is a trap because they're trying to get you to say something.
They're trying to get so this is what I learned from Aaron, and this was, like, so good when I learned it, and this is what I did this morning. What I said, "Well, I appreciate you asking that." And obviously, like, right now, what we're doing is we're thinking about it from a seller's perspective, and obviously, as a seller, your goal is to maximize the dollar value of the property, and just so you know, that's my exact goal, to help you maximize the dollar of the property and to help you get as much money as possible. Now, here's what I often find is helpful. Instead of thinking about this from a seller's perspective, if we think about it from a buyer's perspective, if we put our buyer's hat on instead of our seller's hat on, it actually makes it a little bit easier to think about it from that perspective. So let's say that you were buying this property all over again. And let's say that you walk in and you're like, oh my God, I just love the crown molding. I love the baseboard. I love that it's on a cul-de-sac. I love the entertainer's backyard. And you say to me, as your agent, Jose, I want to write an offer on the property. And then you say, Jose, what do you think I should offer for the property? And as any good agent would, I would say, well, look, let me show you the comps. Let me show you what is sold and closed most recently. So then I proceed to show you a property that sold at 740, but it sold back in September. That's when it sold. And obviously, I show you the next property that started off at 740, but didn't sell at 740, started off at 725. They didn't sell at 725. They went into escrow when they were listed at 700, which that's a more accurate assessment of where the marketplace is right now. And then they show you one that's sitting at 740 on the market. So honestly, if you were a buyer and you were about to make an offer on the property, what do you think that you would be willing to offer for this home that would be somewhat reflective of fair market value? And then shut up. And this is what happens. And it's so good because what will happen is they'll completely forget that they asked you what you thought about your property.
Yep.
And they'll say, well, I think I would offer like 700,000. And that's what you want. You want them to say what they would offer for the property versus you telling them, because if they say it, then it's different. Or they may say something like, they'll laugh. They'll be like, we still want to hear what you have to say, Jose. And then at that point you could say, well,
you could then you could break the tension and be like, all right, so do I have permission to be candid, straightforward? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, you're not going to get angry and throw me in the pool. You're not going to get angry, throw me out of the house. And they're like, haha, no. Like, okay, well, having looked at this information, seen what's active on the market, not selling, sold and closed most recently, the marketplace seems to be showing us somewhere around that 700 number seems to be reasonable. Or I would ask it. Yeah, I would ask it in another way. Yeah. I would say like, yeah, like, gosh, I mean, if you were to buy this home, I imagine having looked at this data, you might offer like 700. Do you think you would offer a lot more than 700?
This is the way you taught it to me back in the day. And the way you taught it to me was like having looked at, well, that's a good question. Well, having looked at this information, honestly, would you offer more than $700,000 for the property? Yeah, and that's your way of telling them like, hey, look, that's where the value is at. And then they'll very likely be like, no, probably not.
Probably not. And then you say, don't you think most buyers feel pretty similar to you?
Exactly.
And they're like, yeah. And you're like, okay, good. So I'm in agreement with you. The marketplace showing us somewhere around 700 seems to be reasonable. Now it just comes down to strategy. Prices, strategy, and attempt to get the most. We'll go over the two strategies that you have because I want you to feel comfortable with the one you end up choosing. Whatever you decide, I'll support you 100%.
And that's key because they're going to ask you, well, like, what do you think that the home is worth? And at that point, well, most agents say, well, look, the marketplace seems to be indicating that right.
Or even worse, you know what they'll say because they're not trained. I believe, I think, I can get you, which is like the worst.
And then if you say a number that they don't like, guess what's going to happen? They're going to shut down completely. And then at that, it's so hard to re-engage them at that point because they wanted to hear something different, basically.
That's right. And what ends up happening psychologically is they end up anchoring you with what you said.
Yeah. And now they're not able to look at this information.
And this example that you gave, Jose, this is really cool because we didn't even plan it that way. This is exactly what happened on that appointment. The other agent, how they presented it, they did not do what we're talking about with a super high degree of probability. They were like, hey, here's all the reasons why it's going to go down. Here's what I think it's worth, and da-da-da-da-da-da. You instead aligned yourself. Yeah, there are homes that have sold for that. Let's take a look at them, right? So we can see what they have to offer. And then we can look at properties that are kind of similar to yours, features and amenities wise, size, square footage, things of that nature. And in doing so, we'll be able to compare apples to apples, and we can see where the market, buyers and sellers, have been agreeing for homes that are similar to yours. Now, before I do that, what I'd like to do is just review some tax records. So that way you're making sure you walk down that whole path. You didn't fall into the trap when they were like, what do you think it's worth, Jose?
Yeah.
You didn't verbally vomit, and you walked it down this way. And then when you were like, yeah, I mean, gosh, I'd have to imagine that if you were going to buy this home all over again, you probably wouldn't offer more than 700 having looked at this information, would you? And nah, probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah, don't you think most buyers feel pretty similar to you? Yeah. Okay. So we seem to be in agreement. The market is showing us around 700 seems to be reasonable. Now it just comes down to strategy, and then you go down that path.
Yeah. What I got from the agent that he's on my team that I role played with this morning is like, I noticed that it wasn't like this huge doom and gloom, like, hey, look, the market, this. It was more like, hey, look, like There are properties that are selling at 740. This is a more recent property. There's a property that's active right now. And that alone paints a very good picture without you having to say very much, basically.
Yeah, so Jaime's on here, bro. Hey, Jaime asked the question. He's like, "Do you think this will work with the driver personality?" Yes. The only difference is just delivery.
Well, in some cases, like even going into the market analysis, like they'll stop you in the driver personality. They'll say, "Hey, Jaime, just tell me what the house is worth." Basically,
Yeah, it's gonna be bottom line.
It's gonna be like, "Hey, just tell me what the house is worth." And Jaime's been on appointments with me. So I basically
Yeah,
regularly take Jaime on appointments with me, and he'll notice that in some cases I'm just like, look, the marketplace seems to indicating that right around 700. Or look, in some cases, I'm even guilty of saying, hey, I believe that we can get right around $700,000 for the property. Now, what I'm also saying is, in some cases, I'll say, well, look, I can like they say, they stop you at the very beginning. Hey, just tell me what the home is worth. Look, I can very easily tell you a number, but here's what's going to happen. The second I tell you what the house is worth, you're going to look at me and you're going to say, well, how did you come up with that number? So instead of me just telling you a number, if you allow me to go through these comps, I promise you very clearly, we're both going to be able to see where the value is at now. And then they'll continue to let me go. Now, if they push back again, I'm just going to be like, hey, look, this is where
yeah,
the
it's where it is.
value is at.
And what I would,
Or if they're an extreme driver, I may just cut to the chase.
yeah, I get that.
Extreme.
Yeah, and if you know that when you spoke to them and you set the appointment or whatever. So what I would do is I just condense everything. So let's say we sit down and instead of going through like the, hey, first and foremost, so I meet with you and drivers extremes, they're going to shake your hand firmly. They're going to like that you're on time or early. They're going to like that. Hey, Jose, I like that you're early. Like, you'll know. They'll shake your hand really firm and they're like ready to rock, right? So what I would say is if I felt that and noticed that and perceived that, hey, Jose, you strike me to be a bottom line kind of guy. I'm the exact same way. So our conversation today will be quick and efficient and to the point. What we're going to be covering is, specifically what we could get for the home, what would be top dollar. I'll show you very briefly and quickly some information that will support that, not because I made it up, but because the marketplace is showing us. Then I can answer any questions you may have. If it all makes sense and you feel comfortable and confident, we can take care of the appropriate paperwork because I have it with me. Fair enough? And they're like, yeah, you're speaking their language, right? So
Yeah.
I follow like a similar process. I just condense it because I know that they're that way. And then to your point, Jose, I do the same thing in the price where like, I'm going to give you like, I'm going to acknowledge what you said, and then I'm going to frame it. Then I'm going to give you the message. I'll bring you back. But if you keep pushing after about twice of doing that, then I'm just going to tell you.
I'm just gonna cut to the chase, basically. Now, here's what I loved about what you just said about like, hey, look, I'm gonna be very concise, very straightforward, very straight to the point. I may even say something like, look, in our phone conversation, you mentioned to me that you wanted right around 750. Just so you know, I'm in perfect agreement with that. I did the homework in advance. 750 is a number that I would feel comfortable putting this property on the market. Would you be okay with that? And they're like, yeah, I would be okay with that. Great. The only other question that I would have for you is, when would you like to come on the market? Well, I'd like to come on the market on this date. Great. I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions before we take care of the paperwork? And it's
and then the only other thing, because I would do that, and then sometimes afterwards they bring up commission or anything. So like you could be like, yeah, do you have any other questions before we take care of the paperwork? But I would also sometimes be like, okay, good. And then the only other question is compensation. Like, are we good with that? And they're like, yeah, we're good. Great. I have the paperwork with me. Let's move forward. Because I've done where I pushed it forward like that. And then they're like, well, we start to proceed. And then they want to have this whole conversation and bring me back. You know what I'm saying?
Well, what I'll do in that case, like, let's say that I'm like, great. Like, are you, do you have any other questions before we take care of the paperwork? And they're like, what about the commission? I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. I actually forgot to go over that. Like,
Good.
My most sincere apology. We should have covered that already. Here's my policy on commission. What were you thinking? Great. Blah. Come to an agreement.
I'm in agreement with that. Let's move forward. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you're describing though, and what we're kind of demonstrating is something that I call like kind of, it's either like prospecting IQ or like sales IQ, where you just have so many reps. I understand the plays. I understand the
like
process,
it's like if somebody's
but I can
blitzing.
I can call I can call a audible. So like as a quarterback, I was a quarterback in high school, right? So like if I come up to the line and I see that they're running like man-on-man coverage, I may change the play and throw something deep because it's open, right? It's there for the taking sort of thing. So knowing this inside and out allows you to call audibles if you perceive that it's the right time to do so. Exactly. Hey,
Just
this
so you
is
know,
where the pros go to grow, baby.
Yeah, this is probably one question you guys don't want to ask Aaron. It's just what happened last time we all played football, like in a group setting, like he was quarterback and I was quarterback, two
It's too
two
good,
different
bro.
teams, each playing against
Yeah,
each
buddy.
other, So no high
It's
school
good.
experience over here, I'm just teasing you guys.
I know you are.
Um,
I like it.
maybe Jaime can give us some feedback. Jaime, like what did you take from this?
Yeah, let's see if he's still here. What do you think, Jaime? Drop it in the chat.
Nothing. Crickets, bro.
It's all good. Hey, we called on him, and this is what we got. Come on, Jaime.
Yeah. Code.
Wait, where the pros go to grow. That's right, David Kerr. So good, man. I think this is super helpful, super useful. Anybody who wants to geek out on sales, geek out on talk tracks that work, right? Like we pride ourselves here on not just talking about it, but being about it. And most people teach mindset because they can't teach tactics. We are entering into an environment, not entering, we're already in an environment where tactics matter, where skills make the difference, right? Because when times get tough, only the skill get paid. So keep following, checking in, tuning in, because we will keep delivering what you need skill-wise in order to make money in this market. Let's go. Let's grow. Peace.
Later.
Yeah, he's funny.